stuck here in a dream. I'm just stuck here in a dream.
Welcome to the Guns and Yoga podcast. My name is Wendy Hummel. Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to share some information on a few things that I've been working on. First, an exciting project that I've been working on for the past year. I recently launched a course on the Justice Clearinghouse platform called Building a Wellness Program from the Ground Up. I created the course in response to a lot of inquiries that I received over the past few years. The same questions would roll in, whether it be at work or from people that I knew outside of work through the podcast. And they'd ask things like, how did you get your job as a full-time wellness coordinator? How does your agency fund the program? How do you get buy-in from the people at the agency? How do you engage agency members? What qualifications do you need as a wellness coordinator? And more. So after getting these questions for the past few years, I certainly don't have it all figured out, but I decided to put together what I have learned over the past decade about creating and implementing an organizational wellness program. It's a 10-module course, and if you're interested, I'll include the link in the show notes. I will also be speaking at the 25th Annual WIFL Conference in Alexandria, Virginia on August 5th of this year. I'm beyond excited. I'll be presenting a class called Women's Health and Resilience, the relationship between rest, stress, and hormones. So if any of you are going to be at that conference, I would love to meet you. I was also recently on my dear friend Kim Colgrove's podcast. It's called The Well Warrior Show. Kim has been a guest on my podcast twice, but this time I'm the one being interviewed. I'll include the link in the show notes for this and everything else if you'd like to check it out. Now on to today's episode. We talk so much about the importance of mental health on this podcast, but there are other aspects of our health that are just as important. Research tells us that there is a connection between the types of food that we eat, our mental and emotional health, and its impact on things like anxiety and depression. A lack of essential nutrients can be a contributing factor, which is where today's guest comes in. I speak with Megan Lautz. She's a registered dietitian and strength coach who specializes in working with first responders. Megan currently works full-time with the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue in Virginia, but she also sees private clients through her business. Megan started out in corporate wellness, but then transitioned into working specifically with first responders and hasn't looked back since. She is what I refer to as culturally competent, a term that you typically hear when we describe mental health professionals who understand the unique needs in working with first responders. You don't want to miss this episode. It's kind of like having a masterclass in nutrition for the first responder population. So you may want to have a pen and paper handy or the Notes app on your phone because Megan gives us a lot of great tips and information. Her approach is practical, and she promises not to, quote, kale and quinoa you to death. We discuss go bags for those times that you might be held over on shift or stuck on a scene, and the best foods and snacks to include in that go bag. We discuss topics like gastrointestinal and gut issues, fiber and caffeine intake, and how certain foods support brain health and better sleep. Megan is also able to provide medical nutrition therapy, which means that she can work with you on a specialized plan if you have a medical diagnosis, such as cancer. Megan provides so many free resources, recipes, and tips, and all of those links are going to be included in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Welcome to the show, Megan. I'm so happy to have you on the Guns and Yoga podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, before we hit record, we were discussing that I have never yet had a registered dietitian on the show. So just to intro you to the listeners, this is Megan Lautz. She is a registered dietitian and she works currently in Fairfax County, and you serve the population of fire and police. And so I'm so excited to talk to you about what you do day in and day out. But before we get there, could you give the listeners just a little bit of background on you and what you do and how you came to serve this population?
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm Megan Lautz, registered dietitian, also personal trainer, strength coach, but primarily focusing on the nutrition piece now. Basically, I specialize in people who don't have time, money, or energy when it comes to nutrition. They have that predictably unpredictable job with exposure to trauma and lack of sleep. So I'm here to try and make more realistic recommendations that actually fit the shift work, the lifestyle. So I think that's what kind of puts me apart is that I really hyper focus on first responder health risks, but then also how to make it easier for them with their lifestyle. So I initially got lucky. I originally worked in corporate wellness. I wanted to be a sports dietitian, thought I was going to stay in corporate wellness at Northrop Grumman, and then they laid off everybody. Like they laid off the whole wellness program and eliminated it. And ended up falling into a wellness manager position with Montgomery County Fire and Police. And then transitioned to now Fairfax County Fire and Police as their dietitian full time. So while I'm a civilian, what I've tried to focus on when I first started working with this population was I've taken CPAT, I've done 24-hour shifts, I've done 12-hour shifts, I've done ride-alongs, really just tried to understand your jobs and how they feel. And then instead of just coming out and saying, well, you're supposed to eat this way off of a plate and get 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and it just kind of misses the boat. So my goal is to try and to continue to make recommendations that actually fit the career.
Yeah, and that's great. And I want to back up just a little bit. So when you first fell into the job that you did with the agency you were with prior, what did that look like? What were your responsibilities day in and day out? It sounds like you did a great job of jumping right in and learning the job, the nature of the work, and being what I call culturally competent to do the job. So what did it look like? And did you have to design the program from at the agency that you were at, or what did that look like?
Yeah, it kind of depends. In terms of the dietitian portion of the program, I have been flying by the seat of my pants the entire time. Like there is no like framework for working with a population. So that's something that I'm working on personally in my, in the profession of dietetics to kind of start giving a framework there. And I've worked with the CSPDA and the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics to try and help do that. But basically, when I was a wellness program manager for Montgomery County, I just took to fire and police the easiest. I think it was because I just have more of a trainer personality than a dietitian personality. And a lot of the things that I do in the day-to-day are site visits, so smoothie demos, wrap demos, dinner demos at fire or police stations. Unfortunately, right now, because Fairfax, we're pretty short-staffed. It's been primarily like special operations. So crime scene or major crimes or like different units, SWAT schools, that kind of stuff. And then the other thing I do most of my job is now one-on-one. So individualized nutrition counseling. I probably work with 60% police for that and 40% fire for the one-on-one. So interestingly enough, police has really kind of taken to that. And I'd like to say I'm a pretty highly utilized service in Fairfax.
That's amazing. And before we started to record, you mentioned that you aren't the only person that works within the wellness program there. There's other areas. Could you expand on that as well so that anyone who's listening, who either they have a wellness program and looking to expand it, or maybe they're just looking to start something, maybe they can get some ideas?
Sure. So Fairfax County, initially in 2021, I was hired just to work with fire. I was going to be the dietitian full-time for fire. And we had one strength coach, we had a physical therapist. And then what happened in 2022 was Fairfax County Police actually decided to buy into our wellness, our WellFit contract, so our wellness contract. So now we actually have 3 strength coaches, an athletic trainer that police brought in, physical therapist, 5 behavioral health coordinators going up to 7, and in addition to our OC health clinic, and 65 peer fitness trainers, half police, half fire. So basically what we did was combine funding from police and fire to be able to expand our program. We have a gym that's available 24/7 access. We have fitness classes in the morning and in the afternoons prior to shift or after shifts that first responders can come into. They can get personalized nutrition, personalized fitness programs, all from professionals who are civilian, who work full time there. And I point that out because sometimes it's usually like the fit guy or girl who's on shit, like who their main job was to be a police officer. They just were super fit and super passionate. But what happens when staffing deficits come in? The wellness program goes kaput or for a short period of time. So granted, Fairfax is very well funded. But I think when you're starting from scratch, you probably want someone who's a wellness manager. When I was at Montgomery County, I was a dietitian and had credentials as a personal trainer and now strength coach. So I was able to kind of do both. So if you're a smaller department, it helps to have a dual focus, dual cert person. But another place where return on the investment is very high is athletic trainers or physical therapists.
Wow, that's amazing. And so just so I understand, you mentioned this bigger umbrella. I think you said WellFit. Is that who all of those positions are under the umbrella of, and then the agency contracts with them to provide the service, or are you each separate contractors?
Yeah, it's kind of confusing because it depends. So I'm technically under OC Health. The OC Health Clinic is I'm a contractor under the OC Health Clinic, W-2 employee. One of our strength coaches is a fire employee. Two of our strength coaches are contracts through the police department. Our athletic trainers contract through the police department, and our physical therapist is actually an FX physical therapist, and he bills insurance. So I think that's a way we've been able to figure out cost savings because they're not paying the physical therapist's salary. He's billing their insurance. His office is just on site at either OC Health or the wellness contract. So we've kind of like Frankensteined funding and ways to hire people, because the other side of it too, me being a contractor, that meant they could say, hey, we want to hire Megan, not have to open this like position up. Like when Jake, became a strength coach, a fire employee, he had to fight for his job against other people to be hired. So that was kind of a fun excursion.
Gotcha. So okay. So it sounds like it's a little bit complicated, but still it works. I mean, and I'm finding that like when I talk to people that are working within the arena of wellness with police and fire, that it's really structured very differently wherever you go. And so for anyone listening, the way that you have it structured, is this something that's just very specific to the area that you're in? Or let's say somebody listening in another state is like, hey, I'm really interested in what they've got going on. Do they need to seek that out separately, or could you or the organization that you mentioned be a resource to provide those contractors?
Yeah, so Fairfax is pretty open, I would say. So I guess the person who quote unquote oversees is our battalion chief, like our health and safety battalion chief. It was Chief Brian Edmondson, but he promoted. So now it's Chief Chris Johnson. So they're usually pretty open about sharing information. Like if you want to talk to the strength coach about the strength stuff, if you want to talk to the physical therapist, we're all pretty open, and we would be happy to help explain our positions or how things came to be. Our goal is to create public safety as a unified front, with resources that are specific to them, and treat them kind of like those athletic teams that you see, because it's not just a 3 to 5 year, 10-year career. You're talking 25 years plus. So we need to be able to adjust around the career for you.
And it sounds like what you're describing is the term I've heard before called tactical athlete. You're kind of looking at first responders and treating them like that with this multifaceted approach.
Yes. I like to think of police and fire as a combination of corporate wellness and sports nutrition. Right. There are aspects like SWAT or emergency response teams, fire, when they do fire suppression, that has that sports aspect. But really the day-to-day, like the high risk for overweight and obesity, cardiovascular disease, cancer, back and knee pain, those kinds of things we're kind of taken care of from that corporate wellness perspective. So it's a little different from sport. But it can be very effective if done correctly.
And so I'm curious. So I work at the agency that you serve, let's say, and I want to come see you, and I feel maybe I want to lose weight, or I want to change my diet. I want more energy. Your office is on site. Is that correct?
Yep. So I'm at the OC Health Clinic on Mondays, and then Tuesday through Thursday, I am at the gym, the WellFit gym. Part of the reason that I'm not at the Occ Health Clinic all the time is, one, I like to be with the trainers, and two, Occ Health is at headquarters, and a lot of police and fire do not feel comfortable coming to headquarters for like that kind of stuff. So they feel more comfortable at the gym. So that's the primary reason why I'm at WellFit a little bit more frequently.
So when you say WellFit, is that a standalone facility that's separate from the agency that they would go and see you at?
Yes, it's basically a warehouse gym that they have 24-hour access to that is separate from headquarters and Occ Health.
Gotcha. Okay, so I come to see you. Can you walk me through what you would do, how you would assess me, and then how you would decide what kind of plan to give me, and maybe even speak to some of the successes that you've seen and what you've done?
Sure. Yeah. So meeting with a dietitian, I think a lot of people are really scared of us as dietitians because they think we're just going to kale and quinoa you over the head and make you eat perfect all the time and that kind of stuff. And really, we're just trying to make this balance and actually work in your real life, right? You're going to have pizzas sometimes. You're going to want to have a cupcake at your kid's birthday party, and all those things work into a diet. So when you first meet with me, I have an app called Healthy. They can schedule through that. It costs them nothing. There's a 2 to 3 week waiting period just because of the capacity that I have. So I see about 15 to 20 people a week. And that can be in person, Zoom, or phone. So usually it really depends. I would say my number one goal that I get is weight loss, like fat loss. So, if I'm working with someone on that, I might have them try something like MyFitnessPal, try tracking calories so they learn a little bit more about food. But if that's not the right fit, which sometimes it isn't, we'll be talking about like strategies, how to eat for midnight shifts, how to pack a go bag if you are like crime scene or other on-call positions, how to prepare for squat school, those kinds of things. It really kind of varies based on the person, but every approach is tailored to the individual and their food preferences and their lifestyle for that season of their life.
Yeah, I can imagine it's going to be very different if you've got somebody who's in their 20s versus somebody who's on the other end of the spectrum like me, like late 40s, early 50s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the thing that I think the biggest change that happens over the course of the career is, when you're a 20-year-old bachelor, like you could go to the gym for 2 hours a day, you could meal prep, you can do all of those things. But then maybe you settle down, you get married, you have kids, you might promote into positions. That's where that personal time really starts to get challenged. So then the recommendations might be shifted towards what can we outsource if possible? For example, meal prep programs. We've partnered with a local meal prep company called Mighty Meals, and they gave our officers and firefighters a 25% off discount for their meal prep services. Just trying to kind of strategize around the fact that their lifestyle is changing because, now they're adding kids in, they might add injuries or traumatic stress and all those other things.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And so if somebody comes to see you, typically how long do you see them and how many times do they come see you, or is it just kind of depend on the person?
Yeah, it's the first session is usually about 45 minutes to an hour, and then the follow-ups are half hours. Based on the capacity of my schedule, it's usually every 2 to 3 weeks. If I have a private client, like through my business, I try to see them within a week. And that's just because I throw a lot of stuff. Typically, it's pretty overwhelming. Like there's a lot of stuff that we talk about. And if they're trying logging, it's a really hard habit to learn. So I want to see them pretty quickly to see how I can troubleshoot it. Whereas if it's 2 to 3 weeks, like they try it for a week, something pops off and, the kids get sick. I try not to leave too much time between, but they, in terms of how long people might stay with me, sometimes it's a month and sometimes I've had people for a year, 2 years. And at that point they're checking in with me monthly, quarterly, just to see maintenance and how to adjust around shift if it changes.
Yeah, because I can imagine that you provide that accountability and support that they're looking for that ongoing to make sure that they kind of achieve their goals or stay on track.
Yep. And also to clarify, so as a a lot of officers aren't aware of the difference between like a dietitian and a nutritionist. And a dietitian, we can do what's called medical nutrition therapy. And there is one type of nutritionist who can do it as well. They're called certified nutrition specialists. But rarely is that the TikTok influencer that you see on the internet, right? But a registered dietitian is able to provide medical nutrition therapy. So if they go to Occ Health and they pop, their cholesterol is high, they just got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they're having trouble managing IBS, or if they have cancer and they have a type of, for example, I've been doing a lot of low iodine diets because of some thyroid cancers that have popped up with our firefighters. I can work with them on that medical nutrition side and then refer out if it gets a little too in the weeds for what I'm comfortable with. The other important thing to know with that is a lot of dietitians can do insurance. So if you're an officer listening to this and you're like, I want a dietitian, you can work with a dietitian for free or very low cost through your insurance. Now, the downside is they might not understand your job, but if you find one who's willing to work with you, that can make a really big difference for you. I'm trying to get to offer insurance. I just got accepted through Aetna, but I am not very smart on the back end. So we're a work in progress over here.
That is one thing that I have heard is very challenging to navigate from other practitioners is the insurance world. So I don't envy that. But that's really good information because I didn't know that. I assumed that you didn't take any insurance. So that's very helpful to know. So besides working for the agency for Fairfax, you also take private clients, which obviously they can pay you, or like you said, they can utilize their insurance.
Yes, it's primarily self-pay right now. I'm working, like I said, I just got approved through Aetna at the beginning of this year. So hopefully within the next few months, I'll have some of the major providers so that I can maybe take some people and reduce the cost. But right now it's currently self-pay. I also do a lot of public speaking. So I'll be at ISCP's Officer Safety and Wellness conference in March in Louisville. So I'll be speaking on healthiest eating for law enforcement. So other things like that I'll do on the side in addition to working for Fairfax.
Well, that'll be great because I'll get to meet you in person because I'll be there.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm on Friday. So we'll see how this goes.
I'll make sure I come to see you for sure. That'll be great. So backing up just a little bit, because you talked about this medical component, and we hear a lot of talk about police officers in particular, and of course firefighters, metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. Is that something that you see a lot in your practice?
I would say that's probably like a pre-diabetes case or a type 2 diabetes case. For sheriff and police is the number one referral that I get from Occ Health. The challenge that I've found with those referrals is like a lot of times they're not ready to work with me. Like they're doing it because like if they are, they were just trying to tell the doctor, yeah, I'll meet with her. So I haven't figured out how to kind of bust through that barrier yet. But yes, there's a pretty high risk for like things like prediabetes or type 2 diabetes for fire and then, for police and also fire. It's just, I've found it's really hard to nail them down to actually get an appointment with me to want to make some of those changes. And I think it's just some fear maybe based.
Well, and it's never easy to change habits and lifestyle. There's a lot of resistance to that, and I'm guessing that's a big part of your job is working with people in changing behaviors, which can't be easy. But I would think, because we have some experience at our agency with this, I would think that sometimes it serves as a wake up call, like when you have a medical diagnosis or, you can see that the numbers are shifted. And if you don't do something, like you said, it could lead to being diabetic versus pre-diabetic. So I don't know the answer to that. If that's not enough motivation, I'm not really sure what would be.
I think a lot of people are just like, for this population, I think they want to try, when they have that kind of diagnosis, they want to figure it out themselves. Like they want to be able to figure out themselves. But I encourage you to work with a professional because sometimes what happens is that knee-jerk reaction, oh, I have diabetes, like it's a carb issue, so cut out all carbs. And that can lead to hypoglycemic events or just a lot of fear-mongering when it comes to food. Whereas we can kind of work with you to, optimize your health, optimize your weight loss without coming at a cost to your social life and your food preferences. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize in that stage. They just think that in order to fix the problem, it's like you got to cut off your whole right arm, when really you just need to kind of make a small adjustment.
You bring up a really good point, which tells me you're very familiar with this culture, and that so many of us like to go it alone. We try to tough it out and not utilize the resources around us. So that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. What are some of maybe the tips you can give? Because one of the challenges, of course, is not just shift work, but working overtime, getting called into work. What types of tips, or do you recommend for those who experience that?
You mean specifically if like your last minute call-ins, that kind of thing?
Yeah, like first, if like, let's say you work third shift, and then also like what you do, maybe if you work overtime or maybe getting called in and your sleep is disrupted, you work a longer amount of hours than anticipated. What are some things that you commonly recommend for shift workers?
Yeah. So my number one recommendation for shift workers is always, always, always to have a go bag of snacks on hand and like a ton of options, right? Because sometimes that might end up being your only meal for several hours. Like I've had people who've been stuck on scenes for 20 hours plus. And, while they might eventually get a meal at some point during that time, it's usually several hours before that happens and they're like feeling like they're going to pass out. So things that I recommend for go bag is going to be ideally non-perishable, or at least it's going to last a while. So I'm a big fan of applesauce pouches. And yes, I mean the baby food. So applesauce pouches is a full serving of fruit. It's non-perishable and it'll last for 3 to 6 months. If you've got toddlers, you can probably fight the toddler to take some of those or get your own stash. They're great pre-workout because they're a quick source of carbs that don't hurt people's stomachs. Or if you're, literally screaming down the highway to a call, you can shoot in an applesauce pouch if you feel yourself going lightheaded. So a lot of my officers really love the applesauce pouches. Other things that are a little less non-perishable, like to stick in your car overnight. Fairlife protein shakes. I mean, any protein shake is fine. But I like Fairlife because it's basically milk with more milk. Like they pulled some of the water out so that it has a higher protein, higher calcium, potassium content, which I think is important for our officers. Other things like nuts and seeds packs, like trail mix, dried fruit, and not just like the cranberries and the raisins, like the mango, dried pineapple, dried apples, like the ones that actually taste good and don't suck. What else do I recommend? Jerkies, tuna packets, chicken packets, smoothie packets, cereal like Cheerios or mini wheats that you can pick at. So, or even Smart Pop or Skinny Pop, white cheddar popcorn. All of those are good, healthier options that will last in a bag for several days. And if you had to just kind of mash together some snacks, like you have something available.
That's some really great advice. What do you tell people who, are regularly on, like, let's say a third shift, which might look like a 10 p.m. to a 6 a.m.? Do you give them any recommendations about when they should eat, timing of meals and things like that?
Yeah, so it's got to be down to the individual. Some people for midnights, in the case of midnights, like they just do better with intermittent fasting. And that intermittent fasting is dependent on when they tell me is best for them to do the fasting. Is it better for them to fast for a good portion of that shift? Or is it better for them to fast when they're off shift? If they're on the younger end, like they don't have a ton of responsibilities, like they don't have to go take care of their kids after shift or have side jobs, then they're probably better off fasting when they get home because they're sleeping for that portion. If they're going straight into daddy, mommy daycare, it might be part of that shift needs to be somewhat fasted. So the meal timing really comes down to the individual. Some people, it's like, they eat dinner with their family before they go. They have another thing mid 1 to 3 a.m., and then maybe something small on their ride home, or at least an option in case they get held over, and they don't get home in time to either eat something. So it's really hard to give a blanket recommendation for midnight shifts. It really kind of has to come down to how that person feels and how busy that shift is.
And you mentioned intermittent fasting, which is something that we hear a lot about. Could you explain a little bit further about what that actually is?
Sure. So I'm not like by any means like an intermittent fasting pusher. I think it's a tool. I don't love it for fire and I don't love it for SWAT. And so basically, intermittent fasting is basically a glorified skipping breakfast. Like some people say it's the millennials version of skipping breakfast, where the traditional time period is like you fast for 16 hours and you eat for an 8-hour window. So you would stop eating at 8 p.m. and you'd start eating at noon. And the challenge is that everybody starts with that protocol. But the problem is some people get really hungry. It leads to overeating later in the day. Their energy levels drop. So I usually recommend a 12 and 12 to start. You fast for 12 hours. You have 8 hours to eat. So what it does is it restricts the time that you have available to eat. And that can restrict calories depending if you're doing it correctly or not. And you're not overcompensating later on. The reason I don't recommend it for fire or special units that may have to do some high intensity work during their shift is if a box drops at 11, or if you have to chase a subject at 11 a.m., an hour before your eating window ends or starts, are you going to be able to perform optimally or are you not? And the research suggests from an athletic standpoint, that's unlikely. For my midnights who, you're in a slower area, the likelihood of you having to, haul is going to be very low, then intermittent fasting might be a good tool. But just make sure that you understand that if you have to break that fast, break it. It's not the end of the world.
Those are such good considerations because you hear so much about these blanket recommendations, like you said, about, try the 16-8 or even 24. And I do a lot of intermittent fasting, but I'm not on the street anymore. So I have an environment that I know I'm not have to go run after anybody. So I appreciate you bringing that up because I think there's some information out there and it's not real clear on what is best suited for your assignment. Let me ask you too, you mentioned earlier that you also help with IBS, and this is kind of the elephant in the room. We don't talk a lot about gut health and IBS and digestive issues, and I know it's something that first responders struggle with, and I'll just be upfront, that's something that really I have struggled with over the course of my career. And I know it all started with the nature of my job and stress and not sleeping well. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with IBS or any bowel movement stuff, it's all super specific to the individual. But maybe I'll kind of take it into like my kind of more fiber rant. So a lot of the challenges with the bowel movements, it's usually first responders. If they're having issues, they're on one stream or the other. Either they're not going at all or they're going too frequently. The other thing that I see in first responder food logs, police and fire, is they're pretty much deficient in fiber. That's probably an extreme statement, but I stand behind it. And fiber is an indigestible form of carbohydrate found in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. What's the first thing to go when you're tired and you're cranky and, your lunch has been delayed 3 hours? Fruits and vegetables, right? Like we're not getting that from Chick-fil-A when the option is French fries, and neither am I, honestly. So it just becomes harder to get that. So the recommendations from the American Heart Association is 25 grams of fiber per day for women and 30 to 38 for men. My first responders are coming in at 5 to 10 grams of fiber a day. And the reason that's important from a bowel movement standpoint, is if you're not getting enough fiber, you might be going too frequently. So if you add fiber in slowly, and I'll explain that in a second, it can help bulk up or reduce the frequency of your bowel movements as you get more consistent with that fiber intake. Or if you're backed up, usually it's my backed up people, this is the most important for, it pushes things out. Now, if I have a firefighter or first responder who is eating 5 grams of fiber a day, I'm not jumping them to 30 or 38 because that's where they're going to feel like there's going to be an accident in the patrol car and they're going to be cursing my name the whole time.
Yeah.
So you have to add this in slowly, like 5 grams a day for a week and then another 5 grams the next week and then another 5 grams. So you slowly add it in through different meals and snacks. The other thing that I've seen is holding urine, which can lead to not really my area of expertise, but pelvic floor issues in both men and women. My women, especially once you have babies, that gets all kinds of messed up. So pelvic floor therapists, especially for my females, post after birth, or even if you're in your 40s and you're noticing things are leaking, that is a time to go to a physical therapist who can specialize in that area, because both my males and females can have pelvic floor issues, especially later in that career from the fact that you guys have to hold it.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, obviously, it's the same for both men and women on patrol, or if you can't get to the restroom, but also for women, it's not so easy to go to the restroom. It's not as easy as it is for men. So like just logistically, because of the nature of the uniform, that could be a reason why women don't go as frequently as they need to. Let me ask you this. So backing up with the fiber. So for those listening, what are a couple of easy ways to add more fiber into your diet?
Yeah. So the way to add more fiber, so all of the go back, most of the go back options that I just mentioned are going to be relatively high in fiber. I love Smart Pop, Skinny Pop, the white cheddar popcorns as a chip alternative. Is it the highest thing in fiber you'll find? No, but 2 grams of fiber is better than no grams of fiber. And it's a great chip option, especially for my midnight people, my day work people who need a car snack on the ride home so they don't eat everything in sight when they get home. Dried fruit, any cut fruit, canned fruit. So you can do canned pineapple in your patrol car pretty easily. It's a little savage, but it does the job. Canned peaches, frozen fruit in smoothies. Yes, you will still keep the fiber content if you blend the whole fruit. So fruit juice will lose the fiber content. Blending the whole fruit will keep the fiber content. And then another thing that I do is when I do wrap demos, the most popular wrap that I do is a buffalo chicken wrap, because if it tastes like a wing, you guys will listen to me for 5 seconds. And that buffalo chicken wrap has a handful of coleslaw veggies in it to count as the full serving of vegetables. And coleslaw veggies are like a couple dollars at the grocery store. They're pre-shredded. They add texture, but they also add a full serving of veggies in the wrap. So if you're looking for recipes, I write part-time for palmbeachgardens.com or PBGFR Wellness, and I put 2 recipes a month up there, and they're my personal meal prep recipes. There's a bunch of wraps, and I can send you that link to put in the show notes.
Oh, I would. Yeah, that would be amazing. So let's kind of transition, because I was going to ask you, this is such great information about how you do one-on-one work, but tell me more about the presentations and the speaking and the conferences that you do, and what is it that you cover? Is it always the same thing, or does it depend on the request?
Yeah, I mean, the presentations vary. I'm trying to break more into law enforcement kind of conferences. I've mostly done fire, but I've recently learned you have to apply to these things for them to want you to come.
That's right.
Which is an obvious thing once you're in it. Yeah. So there's that. But yeah, so the one I'm speaking, my most popular one is healthy-ish eating for first responders. And the reason for that is it's very tangible. It's like, instead of telling you what a protein and a carb and fat is and nutrition 101 and blah, 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 it's like, here's what you eat when you're freaking tired. Here's what you eat when you don't have time. Here's how you hydrate appropriately, that kind of stuff. I have performance nutrition, which usually leans more for like SWAT schools, or like if you're looking for like how to eat before and after exercise. I have officer development nutrition, because as you promote, through your career, your eating habits will change, and how you also are now a leader. So you have people underneath you who are looking up to you. So how do you kind of maintain that, leadership from a nutrition perspective? I have stuff on brain health that I've done for peer support. So I've kind of, I've got all kinds of presentations with all kinds of different flavors, pun intended, that is tailored to either police or fire. And I've also mashed it together if it's a generalized kind of conference.
So now you've just got me so curious, because one of the things that I do outside of this podcast in my full-time role is I manage the wellness unit, which means I manage a 50-person peer support team, and I'm always looking for training and lunch and learn. So I really wish you were in the Midwest, but that's okay. We'll have to figure something out. But I'm really curious about a couple of things that you talked about, though. Hydration and also brain health. Can you speak to those two topics and just kind of touch on those a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So for hydration, one of the big things, well, one, especially during the summertime for officers, is there's a tendency to sweat through a uniform sometimes, or if there's community events where they're standing in the heat, or if you're going through a SWAT or emergency response team school. Then I recommend a product called Oral Rehydration Solutions, ORS products like Liquid IV or Drip Drop. Now, the mistake that my first responders make with these ORS products is going for sugar-free options. So things like LMNT or Element, Drip Drop and Liquid IV both have sugar-free options. Now, that seems like the healthy approach, right? But what a lot of people don't realize is sodium helps pull water across the cell to rehydrate you. But if you have a little bit of glucose available, it will help open another co-transporter, the sodium glucose co-transporter, which then pulls glucose across the cell membrane, which sodium follows and water follows. So when you have a product like Drip Drop or Liquid IV, which has double the sodium and half the sugar of sports drink, you actually speed up rehydration 2 to 3 times as fast as a sugar-free product or even sports drink. So then that gets all the health conscious people in a tizzy because they're like, why are you recommending high sugar, high sodium products? I'm not recommending these on midnight shifts where you're sitting in the patrol car realistically doing nothing, physically not moving, right? You're not doing nothing. That was probably inappropriate. But
we know what you mean.
I am recommend. You're not moving. Maybe you're mentally moving, but you're not physically moving. But when you do SWAT school training, when you do, active shooter drills, or your endurance running, that kind of stuff, where you are sweating significant amounts and you are pushing yourselves hard, sodium and sugar are performance enhancing in high intensity scenarios. They are detrimental to health in high quantities when mostly all you do is sit and in low intensity scenarios. So it comes down to context, but it's really hard for our black and white first responders to really understand that certain products are used for certain instances and certain products are maybe not best in the other scenarios. So that also counts for like, you haven't drank any water and you came on shift at 6 a.m. and it's now closer to 5 p.m., maybe do a Drip Drop or a Liquid IV because it could help rehydrate you when you didn't have access. But you want to try and avoid those situations, if that makes sense from the hydration standpoint.
Yeah, that all makes so much sense to me. It depends on the nature of what you're doing. And do you recommend the sugar-free products in those cases when you are just working midnights or you're not really expending a lot of energy?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it depends too. Like if someone has like high blood pressure or other conditions where we have to restrict sodium, those products are probably not appropriate. I'm still trying to figure out how appropriate they are. Like if you are pushing yourself, I would assume yes, because it's better for you to rehydrate than not, right? So the sugar-free products would be for maybe more day-to-day, and much lower sodium doses, like 200 or something like that. These products have 600 milligrams. So they're pretty high. A firefighter loses 40 ounces of sweat in 30 minutes on the fire ground. It's kind of essential at that point.
Sure. What do you tell people when it comes to energy drinks and caffeine as it relates to hydration? And really just their health.
Oh boy. Yeah,
I had to ask.
Yeah, you have to. So I would be a really dumb first responder dietitian if I just like walked into a station and said, hey, we're going to cut out caffeine entirely, right? Because the reality is the FDA says for healthy individuals, key word is healthy, that 400 milligrams of caffeine per day is probably okay, right? With no more than 200 milligrams in one sitting. So that's 30 to 40 ounces of coffee. That's not unreasonable. Where the first responders go wrong is the energy drinks, the pre-workout supplements, the now dip pouches of pre-workout and coffee. Those really high dose supplements, up to 300 milligrams in a Bang, in a Rain energy drink. And the challenge is you guys build that tolerance very quickly because you're so sleep deprived. So I've seen first responders doing 3-4 bangs a day, 800 to 1200 milligrams of caffeine, and wondering why they feel like garbage. And part of that is if you're getting that high in caffeine, you're probably drinking it too late in your shift. And it's hard because your bedtimes are all over the place, right? But if you have a cup of coffee in the morning and you're going home off shift at 6 or whatever to go to bed, it might not prevent you from falling asleep, but it will prevent you from or reduce the time you spend in rapid eye movement and deep sleep. So you go to bed, and the next time you wake up, you feel like garbage. What do you reach for more of? Caffeine. And it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. So if you were going to do anything, what you want to do is leave a 4 to 5 hour buffer from your last caffeinated beverage to bedtime. For our 9 to 5ers, that's 4 p.m. if you're going to bed at 9. If you're going to bed at like 7 or 8, for my other first responders, math is hard. So like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And that 4 to 5 hour buffer will help reduce the amount of caffeine that's floating around your system that will mess with your sleep. And I will tell you, when I've gotten people from 1,000 milligrams of caffeine, 800 milligrams of caffeine down to 400 to 600, they're like, I have more energy. What kind of witchcraft, did you do? And really all I did was try to pull the caffeine down a bit overall and then away from their bedtime, which leads to better sleep quality.
Yeah, and these are all things that would have been really helpful to know for me 20 plus years ago, because all these mistakes I'm asking about, I've made them.
That's fair. I mean, I probably made half of them too, but I sleep at night.
Yeah, exactly. I do too now for the most part. So one other thing I want to talk to you about, and I could pick your brain for hours. This is it's like a masterclass in nutrition and health. I love it. I do want to talk about brain health just a little bit, because you mentioned you actually specifically mentioned that you do that for peer support teams. So if you could talk to that.
Yeah. So when I've done the peer support team ones, I always include my how to survive shift work. So it's a little bit of the healthy-ish eating for first responders. It's usually a longer, like hour, 2 hour presentation, so that I can get into like some more like nuanced nutrients that can be good for brain health. So hydration is always going to be huge for that. Interestingly enough, so is fiber. So fiber actually, when it's digested in your gut, it's broken down into these short chain fatty acids, specifically butyrate, which travels back up to your brain and can promote brain regeneration, which is important for preventing Alzheimer's and other things like that. So fiber is not just about your poops. It's not just about cholesterol management. It also can help with brain health, which I think is really interesting. Magnesium is also important for that. Specifically it does actually help with sleep. So sometimes I'll recommend 300 milligrams of magnesium per day to help with sleep. Another thing is omega-3s. So diets higher in omega-3s, things like salmon, herring, tuna. Plant-based would be chia seeds, flaxseed, omega-3 fortified eggs. That your brain, the membranes are primarily made or high in DHA. If you're deficient in DHA, that can lead to a higher risk for things like depression, anxiety, and that kind of stuff, ADHD. And there are some studies, I believe the research is kind of mixed, that a higher omega-3 diet could help with depression or reducing risk. So what I prefer getting that through food, right? Because you're going to get protein like from salmon. Astaxanthin is a antioxidant that salmon is high in. But if you had to do fish oil and you're not on warfarin or blood thinners, then usually it's 1 gram a day or up to 2 to 4 depending on the medical condition. And I really want someone to work with the dietitian for that. So there are a bunch of different little nutrients that I talk about that can help with brain health. And so we talked about this nutrient. How can I get it in my diet on the go kind of thing?
Wow. So, I'm sitting here listening to all this and I'm thinking, I'd like to convince you to move to Kansas, but I know that's probably very unlikely. But so let's kind of transition and talk about if somebody does want to work with you remotely, because obviously you do that. What's the best way to get in touch with you? How would that work logistically? If you could just give us all the details.
Sure. So if you're looking for one-on-one, it depends on the state that you live in. So you need to ask me first. Let me know what state you live in first, because dietetic licensure kind of varies. I'm licensed in Illinois and Maryland. Some states like Virginia doesn't require a license. So I might be able to, and I think California doesn't require a license. But if you live in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, I can't really work with you because I'd have to then get a license in that area usually. So sometimes, it depends on the state whether or not I can kind of work with you personally. But if you're looking for stuff for your department, I can do things through Zoom virtually. I just, either the presentations mentioned earlier. I also have a new product called Quick Bites, which is 12 10-minute videos on different topics specific to police or fire. I have 2 versions now that you can incorporate into roll calls, target solutions, and that kind of stuff. So a bunch of different little kind of products and stuff like that I can provide to departments or individuals. But if you want the free stuff, because who doesn't want the free stuff? RescueRD.com has a free recipe book. It's for fire station dinners, but some police stations I know do that, especially midnights, sometimes cook, or it's great for meal prep. And then Rescue RD at rescue.rd on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. And I post, it is fire specific though, because it's hard to have, I'd have to have a whole separate Instagram to put it in police language. But if you like that kind of content for quick and on the go.
Wow, you have a lot of resources to offer people that are free. So that's amazing. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you will be at the IACP OSW in March if anyone listening is going to be attending that. Any other conferences that you're aware of that you'll be at for 2024?
That are police specific, I'm not sure of. If you have any ones to recommend, let me know. But I will probably be at the NSCA Tactical Conference, which will be in Norfolk this year. If you go to that, I'll probably apply to speak, but they haven't opened up applications yet, so we'll see.
Okay, great. Well, I have several recommendations that I can give you once we're done recording. So maybe that can help
awesome.
you out.
That'd be great.
Well, Megan, I really appreciate your time. This has been really educational, informative, and it's obvious you're also very passionate about what you do. And I can tell that it must be very easy for people to want to work with you. And what a great resource that the agencies that you work for are offering to their people. Kudos to them. And again, thank you so much for what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me come on and talk about it. It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Well, is there anything else that you want to say that I didn't ask or that anybody needs to know about other than all the great resources that you mentioned?
Well, my dogs clearly have something to say about it. Overall, I think that the thing I like to end on podcasts is nutrition is kind of nuanced. It always depends on the individual, but don't beat yourself up if you can't stick to the perfect diet that jacked guy on Instagram told you have to do because you owe it to your community. There's a stepwise approach that we can take to make this more sustainable to you. You don't have to be shamed into nutrition and fitness. So, if that means adding 1 extra fruit a day or adding a smoothie with spinach in it, that's a step in the right direction. So it's okay to do these slower steps when your life feels like on fire. And then when your life kind of slows down, we can ramp it up a bit. And sometimes working with a professional can help you figure out what's what.
That's such great advice, such a great note to end on because it doesn't have to be this all or nothing approach. Well, thank you again. Thanks again, Megan. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please share it with somebody else who you think may also enjoy it. Like us or give us a review. And remember, we are better together.